This video is to show you how to apply JessFX encapsulated silicone prosthetics. I'm going to demonstrate with this mauling wound in the shade Fair. I started off by cleaning the skin with witch hazel just to make sure there were no natural oils left on the surface. You can use any astringent as long as it doesn't have oil in it. In the piece in advance too, to remove any powder, you can just use soapy water or the same astringent used on the skin as long as there's no oil or acetone in it. Once you've decided where your piece is going to go, you can start in with your glue. For this I'm just using Pros-Aide. This is an acrylic water-based glue and is the cheapest option you'll find. It's white, but it must dry clear before it becomes tacky, so you don't want to press the two surfaces together until it's absolutely clear. You can speed that up with a travel hairdryer. I'm just applying the glue with a cotton bud here, but you can absolutely use a brush. It's just worth noting it can be hard to get the glue back out of the brush. And I'm just applying the glue in a thin layer both to the skin and the back of the piece. It works best as a contact adhesive, but I am keeping the glue to where there's actually silicone so far, not onto the cap plastic. This is because the cap plastic is so fine, I don't want to risk it sticking to itself until I'm ready, so I get the bulk of the piece down from the middle first. Once I'm happy the piece is secure in the middle, I can do the outside. So I work my way around in stages, doing a little bit at a time so I don't get in a mess, and I'm just applying glue onto the skin, a little bit back onto the cap plastic as well, and waiting for it to go completely clear again before I press it down. As I press it, I sort of smooth from the inside out to avoid trapping any air bubbles. The cap plastic is important because that's what creates the seamless blend between the skin and the prosthetic. If there's a lot of cap plastic on the piece, you may not need to glue it all down, but make sure you glue enough so that when you blend away later, you're not going to hit silicone. The silicone ring around the outside is called the flashing, and I hold on to this as I lay my prosthetic down. I'm holding it taut so that there's no wrinkles, but I'm also making sure I don't overstretch it. If it's stretched, it will want to shrink back into itself throughout the day. It's also really important to make sure all your glue butts up against each other. You don't want any gaps because then those will become air bubbles and places where sweat can collect. Once you're happy that your prosthetic is fully glued down, it's time to blend off the ring of flashing. All JessFX prosthetics are acetone based cap plastic, so you must use pure acetone to dissolve it. Again, I'm just using this on a cotton bud and gently working my way around, but you can also use a brush. Now, obviously acetone is a chemical and can be harmful if not used carefully, but the cap plastic's nice and thin, so you really don't need very much on your cotton bud. Just gently work your way around where the cap plastic meets the skin. Again, I'm holding the ring of flashing taut because the added pressure helps the cap plastic just dissolve away, and you really won't get much acetone on the skin this way. Sometimes it's easier to put a rip in the flashing so that what you've already dissolved doesn't then stick back to itself. Gives you a bit more room to manoeuvre. This is where you've got to be really careful not to dissolve too much of your cap plastic, especially if there isn't very much to begin with. If you dissolve up as far as the silicone, you're going to get a hard edge, and nothing can dissolve silicone, so then you have to use fillers to correct it. Now it's time to paint, and the best thing to use for prosthetics are alcohol activated paints. You activate them with 99% isopropyl alcohol and apply in thin washes, much like watercolour paints. I like to do the majority of my painting with cut down chip brushes so I can flick the paint on, especially when it's matching skin tones. Everyone's skin tone is different, so there's no recipe for what colours to apply. I've used a mixture of blush tones, a bit of light yellow and some vein tone blue because the skin's very translucent. It's helpful to look at a colour wheel so you can see which colours counteract each other and then just gradually build up in nice thin layers. You don't want it to look like the paint is sitting on top of the prosthetic, you want it to look like that colour's coming through it. If you don't need to do a realistic skin tone or you don't have access to alcohol paints, it's best to try and find silicone based paints. Other paints may work also. You'd have to do a little test on the ring of flashing, but avoid water-based paints as they will bead up on the rubber. My camera had cut out here, but you can see I've started to add some colour inside the wound now. I'm just putting some yellow into the fatty details. I'm going to put blood later, so this may all be covered up, but sometimes I like to add blood and then dab away from the high points so you can see some of that fatty tissue showing through. I also like to put in some of the blood tone as well, which again may not be necessary, but it helps me visualise what I'm doing. This is all Illustrator too. I've put less alcohol in this so I can paint it in a little bit thicker. Again, I know it's getting covered up with blood afterwards, so it's pretty messy. I'm also mixing up a slightly darker red just to go in the centres, so when the blood's over top it might help give me a bit of depth to the wound. Then finally I can add my fake blood. Again, got my trusty cotton bud, but I'm going for quite a messy look, so I'm just sort of popping it in anywhere, and I'm going to use a tissue just to kind of dab it and mess it up and make it look a bit more unintentional. There are so many different fake bloods on the market, different brands, different colours, fresh, dry, scab, whatever you could possibly need. Some are better than others. Some may bead up on prosthetics but be perfect on skin. If you get one that does bead up on your piece, add a tiny bit of washing up liquid and that will bind it all back together and stop the beading. I often find less is more with blood because then you can see all the nice detail in the wound. Really quickly, I wanted to mention the removal process, which is another important step if you don't want to damage the skin. All professional makeup stores will sell a range of different prosthetic removers. They're all oil-based, and the oil sinks into skin and lifts the glue off. If you're in a bind or you have someone with particularly sensitive skin, you can use coconut oil. It just might take a little bit longer. I just work the oil all over the piece until I've got an edge lifting up, and then I can hold onto the piece and work the oil underneath until the whole thing comes off. If you're left with any scrappy bits, a nice hot flannel, circular movements will remove anything that's left.